Welcome to Christ Word, where everyday lives meet the light of God's Word. Here, we don't preach. We tell stories. Moments of doubt, turning points, quiet revelations, all woven with raw emotion and unshakable faith. You're not just listening to someone else's journey. You might just find your own reflection in it. And maybe, just maybe, by the end, you'll discover the answer you've been searching for. I will never forget that day. The day I stood amidst the ashes of the dream I had spent my life building. $500,000, money my family and I had worked so hard for, sweat and tears, and so much hope. And then, it disappeared. Vanished like a shattered dream, with no warning at all. I remember sitting down, head in my hands, tears flowing uncontrollably. I don't know how long I cried, only that the pain coursed through my whole body, my mind crushed to pieces. That feeling, that pain, pushed me to the very edge of despair. And in that moment, I turned back to something I thought I understood before, but had never truly experienced so deeply: faith. I knelt down, my forehead touching the ground, sobbing as I prayed to God. Lord, please hear me. Please help me, because I don't know what else to do. Can you imagine? Someone who once had it all, career, money, reputation, suddenly thrown into a void, lost with no way out. I had been scammed. Betrayed out of a huge sum of money I couldn't even believe was gone. And the worst part? It wasn't just losing the money. It was the feeling of betrayal, of being deeply wounded. The person I trusted most, the one I thought was a friend, a colleague, turned out to be the source of this nightmare. For a while, I didn't dare tell anyone. I withdrew into the darkness of my room, too ashamed to face anyone or speak my pain. It felt like if I said it out loud, everything would only get worse. I remember praying the simplest words, but from the very bottom of my heart. God, please show me your unchanging love. Please give me strength to overcome this. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, when your whole world collapses beneath your feet, and the only thing you can cling to is the thinnest thread of faith. I don't know why, but in that absolute silence, I began to feel something different. A voice, soft and deep within my soul, like a whisper from God. It wasn't a clear answer, not an instant miracle. It was comfort, a tiny flicker of hope in the darkness. I still remember that moment clearly, when I slowly opened my eyes and saw the first light in my heart, even though so much pain still lingered. I wondered, could this be the beginning of a journey I never imagined? A path God was leading me through the storms, to find myself again, and even more, to reclaim every single penny that was lost. I wasn't sure. But the only thing I knew for sure was that I had to believe. Believe in something greater than myself. Believe that even if I lost everything, I could still rise. And in the days that followed, while everything was still dark, I began to write down every thought, every prayer. I remember softly repeating a simple phrase every morning: start your day thanking God. Just a gentle reminder not to forget that no matter the loss or pain, there is always something to be grateful for. Day by day, I didn't know where I was going, but I felt a change slowly igniting inside me. There was a little secret, a small detail I noticed when I thought all hope was gone. It came unexpectedly and left me wondering. Could it be the first sign from God? A tiny signal that carried great meaning? You won't believe what it was, or how it opened a new door for me. The days after that night felt like walking through thick fog. My mind was clouded with questions, doubts, and that aching sense of loss. Yet, amidst all the confusion, I held tightly to those few simple prayers I whispered in the dark: God, let me see the depth of your unchanging love, and help me trust when I feel lost. I started waking up earlier, just to spend quiet moments alone. Not to ask for miracles or answers, but simply to say thank you. I would tell myself, start your day thanking God, and somehow, that little practice became my anchor. Even on the hardest mornings, those words reminded me I was not completely alone. I remember one particular morning. The sunlight barely touched my window, and my heart was heavy as usual. But instead of falling into the usual spiral of despair, I opened my Bible to a passage I hadn't read in years, a verse about God's faithfulness. It spoke of how His love never fails, even when our circumstances crumble. Something in those words stirred something deep inside me. It wasn't a sudden fix. It was subtle, like the first warm rays of dawn pushing away the night's cold. I realized that my pain didn't make me less loved or less worthy. If anything, it was the moment I needed God's love the most. I started journaling then. Writing out my fears, my anger, my confusion, and also my prayers. I wrote about the betrayal, the loss, the shame. But I also wrote about hope, about wanting to believe again. At first, the pages were full of brokenness. But gradually, I began to find peace in the act of pouring my heart out. And then, almost without me noticing, something else began to happen. I stopped seeing my loss as just a tragedy. I started to see it as a challenge, a mountain I had to climb, not to punish me, but to transform me. I thought a lot about trust. How had I trusted so blindly? How had I not seen the signs? And yet, more importantly, how could I learn to trust again? Not just people, but God's plan in all this. One evening, I remember sitting alone, exhausted, wondering if I would ever get back what was taken from me. That's when I felt it, a calm voice in my spirit. Not words, exactly, but a feeling. A conviction that said, "You will reclaim what was lost." It was not about money at that moment. It was about reclaiming my identity, my peace, my purpose. The assurance that God had not abandoned me, and that He was working behind the scenes even when I could not see it. I took a deep breath and whispered a prayer, "God, let me see your hand at work. Help me to walk by faith, not by sight." Days turned into weeks. My prayers grew stronger, and my heart began to heal slowly. I reached out to a trusted friend, someone I had been too ashamed to tell before. Speaking aloud what I was going through helped me release some of the burden. I realized that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. That friend reminded me of a truth I had forgotten, that sometimes, God allows storms to come, not to drown us, but to teach us how to swim. It was a turning point. With renewed courage, I started to take small steps. I reviewed all my financial documents again, looking for any clues, any mistakes that could help me understand what had happened. I sought legal advice, prepared myself for the long process ahead. But alongside every practical action, I kept praying. Not just asking for a miracle, but asking for guidance, for patience, for wisdom. I remember praying a simple prayer one morning, "God, give me eyes to see the path you have for me." And slowly, doors began to open. People reached out with advice, unexpected leads appeared. It was as if God was weaving a plan I could not yet fully understand. Yet, the process was not easy. There were moments of frustration, setbacks, moments when I felt like giving up. But each time, I remembered my prayers, and I reminded myself of that quiet assurance inside, that I was not alone, and that I was being led step by step. At night, when the world was silent, I would sit quietly and reflect. Sometimes tears would come again, but this time, they were different. They were tears of surrender, of releasing control, of trusting in something bigger. I also began to understand the deeper meaning of faith. It was not about getting what I wanted quickly or easily. It was about learning to walk with God through the unknown, embracing the journey, even when the destination was unclear. One day, as I sat by the window watching the rain fall softly, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. I whispered another prayer, "Thank you, God, for never leaving me, for loving me through it all." That peace didn't mean all my problems were gone. Far from it. But it was the beginning of something new, a hope rooted in God's unchanging love, stronger than any loss. Looking back, I realized that moment was when my heart truly began to heal. Because faith isn't about avoiding storms, it's about finding the strength to rise each time the waves crash down. And as I continued on that path, I found that the real victory was not just reclaiming what was lost, but rediscovering who I was in God's eyes. As the days turned into months, I found myself walking a path I never expected. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about something deeper, something I couldn't put into words at first. It was about healing my soul, rebuilding trust, and learning to see life through new eyes. I remember one morning when the sun peeked through my curtains, and I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. I had been through so much, yet something inside me whispered, "Keep going. Don't give up." That whisper became my companion. I clung to it during moments of doubt, during nights when fear tried to pull me under. I realized faith was less about grand gestures and more about those small, quiet moments of choosing hope again and again. It wasn't easy. Every step forward was met with questions: what if I fail again? What if this pain never leaves? But I kept turning back to prayer, not just asking for answers, but seeking the strength to face whatever came. One day, I found myself writing another prayer, this time a little bolder: "God, show me how to reclaim every penny, every part of my life that was taken." It felt audacious. Like asking for a miracle. But somehow, in the act of asking, I felt courage rising within me. Slowly, I began to take action beyond just prayer. I researched, made calls, reached out to professionals who could help untangle the mess left behind. I learned to be patient with the process, even when it seemed slow or frustrating. And then, something surprising happened. A new lead came, a piece of information I hadn't seen before. It was small, but it sparked a flicker of hope. That flicker grew as I followed it, step by step. The journey was not linear. There were days of progress and days when I felt stuck. But the difference was, I wasn't walking alone anymore. I felt God's presence in the quiet moments, in the people who reached out, even in the struggles themselves. I began to understand that reclaiming my life wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my peace, my identity, my faith. Sometimes, I would sit quietly and remind myself of a simple truth I discovered: God's love never fails, even when life falls apart. That truth carried me through the darkest hours. And slowly, piece by piece, things began to change. Not always in the way I expected, but in ways that built strength inside me. I learned to forgive, not just those who had wronged me, but also myself for the moments of doubt and fear. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was freeing. I started to see that my story wasn't just about loss, it was about resilience, about faith that carries us beyond the pain. One night, as I sat reflecting on the journey so far, I realized something profound. The tears I shed, the prayers I whispered, the hope I clung to, they had all brought me here. I wasn't the same person who had fallen into despair months before. I was stronger, more grounded, and more certain of God's unfailing love. And through it all, I learned that faith isn't about never falling, it's about rising every time we fall, with God's hand holding us steady. There was a moment not long after when everything shifted in a way I never anticipated. I was sitting alone one evening, the weight of months pressing down on me, wondering if all this effort would ever bear fruit. The exhaustion was real, physical, emotional, spiritual. I felt like I was running on empty. But then, quietly, something changed. It wasn't a thunderclap or a dramatic sign. It was a simple, still voice inside me that whispered, "Trust me." I didn't want to trust anymore. Not after all the pain. But somehow, those two words settled over me like a soft blanket, warming the coldest parts of my heart. That night, I prayed differently. Not begging for answers or relief, but surrendering. God, I don't know how this will end. But I choose to trust you, even when I can't see. It felt like the first true act of faith in a long time, not dependent on what I could control or understand, but a choice to rest in God's love no matter what. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Opportunities began to appear, people who could help, ideas I hadn't considered before. It was as if the path I needed to walk was quietly unfolding step by step. But more than that, my heart started to heal in ways I didn't expect. The bitterness and anger that once threatened to consume me softened. I found space for peace, even in the uncertainty. One afternoon, as I was reflecting, a prayer came naturally to my lips: God, let me see the depth of your unchanging love. Help me believe it even when the world feels uncertain. That prayer became my anchor. It reminded me that while my circumstances might shift, God's love was a constant I could cling to. I also began to see how this journey was teaching me more than I ever wanted to learn, about patience, humility, forgiveness. I forgave those who wronged me, not because they deserved it, but because I needed freedom. Forgiving lifted the chains of anger that held me back. I forgave myself too, for the times I doubted, for the moments I felt weak. I realized that grace wasn't just a gift from God, but something I needed to extend to my own heart. And in that space of grace, something miraculous began to happen. I started to reclaim not just my finances, but my joy, my purpose, my faith. Every step forward wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Every prayer wasn't always answered in the way I hoped, but I felt God's presence stronger than ever. Looking back, I see now that this wasn't just a story about losing money or being scammed. It was a story about being broken open, so God could rebuild me stronger than before. It was about learning that sometimes, the greatest victories come not from what we gain, but from what we choose to hold on to: faith, hope, love. And that, in the end, is the most precious treasure we can ever reclaim. There came a day when I realized that the journey I had been on wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. Every challenge, every tear, every whispered prayer had shaped me in ways I never expected. I began to see myself not as a victim of circumstances, but as someone being refined by fire. It was during one quiet morning, as the sun was just beginning to warm the world, that I felt a deep stirring inside my heart. I sat with my journal and found myself writing a prayer that poured out everything I was feeling: God, I am weary, but I am willing. I want to walk through this pain and come out stronger on the other side. Help me reclaim all that was stolen, not just my money, but my peace, my purpose, my faith. This prayer marked a turning point. I realized that reclaiming what I had lost would require more than just legal action or financial recovery. It would demand perseverance, faith, and a willingness to be vulnerable and honest, not just with others, but with myself. The next weeks were filled with countless steps, some small, some significant. I contacted lawyers, gathered documents, and sought advice from experts who could help untangle the mess. It was exhausting, and sometimes I felt like giving up. But every morning, I reminded myself to start my day thanking God, focusing on the blessings that remained, however small. I started to share my story more openly, not just with friends, but with people I barely knew. I discovered that vulnerability opened doors to support, to new relationships, and to unexpected opportunities. People who heard my story reached out, offering help or simply a listening ear. I realized I wasn't alone in this journey. One moment that stood out was when a stranger sent me a message after hearing about what I had gone through. They wrote, "I've faced something similar. Your faith inspires me to keep going." That message filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for anyone who felt broken and lost. But the road wasn't smooth. There were setbacks that tested my resolve. Documents got misplaced, phone calls went unanswered, and legal processes dragged on far longer than I ever imagined. There were days when I felt crushed by the weight of it all. Yet, even in those moments, I turned back to prayer. Sometimes simple, sometimes desperate: God, give me strength for today. Let me see the light even in this darkness. And somehow, those prayers were answered, not always in ways I expected, but always in ways that gave me hope. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to come together. I started to receive partial reimbursements, agreements to cooperate from unexpected parties, and a sense that the tide was turning. More importantly, I felt my heart healing. The bitterness softened, replaced by gratitude and a deeper understanding of God's timing. I also learned the power of forgiveness. Forgiving those who had betrayed me was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It wasn't about excusing their actions, but freeing myself from the chains of anger and resentment. Forgiveness opened the door for peace, peace I hadn't realized I was missing. In forgiving myself, I found grace. I had blamed myself for trusting too much, for not seeing the warning signs. But I began to see that faith means trusting even when we don't have all the answers. It means taking risks and sometimes falling, but always rising again. Throughout this process, I kept clinging to the idea that faith is a journey, not a destination. Some days were full of light, others were dark and uncertain. But I was learning to walk with God through it all. One morning, as I sipped coffee and reflected, I wrote a simple line in my journal: God, thank you for never leaving me, for walking beside me in every moment, for turning my tears into testimony. That line captured everything I had learned, that even in the darkest valleys, God's love never fails. That the deepest pain can birth the strongest hope. And as the recovery continued, both financially and spiritually, I felt called to share my story. Not to seek sympathy, but to encourage others who might be facing their own storms. I wanted them to know that even when it feels like everything is lost, there is a way forward. That God's love is a constant, unchanging foundation. That faith can carry us through the hardest trials. Because in the end, reclaiming what was lost isn't just about money or possessions. It's about reclaiming ourselves, our peace, our joy, our purpose. And that is a victory far greater than anything money can buy. As time passed, I began to understand that what I had experienced was not just a trial but a profound lesson in faith and resilience. The journey to reclaim what was lost became less about the money and more about the transformation within me. I learned to embrace the quiet moments, those pauses in life where God's presence feels closest. Sometimes it was in the stillness of early mornings, other times in the middle of a busy day when I stopped to breathe and pray, God, help me see your grace in every situation. These small prayers became a lifeline, reminding me that no matter how chaotic life seemed, God's love remained steady and unchanging. I also realized the power of community. In sharing my story, I connected with others who had faced similar hardships, people who understood the pain of betrayal, loss, and the struggle to trust again. Their encouragement became a source of strength. Together, we prayed, supported one another, and celebrated every small victory. It was in this fellowship that I truly felt God's healing work at hand. One of the greatest breakthroughs came when I fully surrendered my fears and doubts. I remember sitting quietly one evening, feeling overwhelmed by the uncertainty ahead. I closed my eyes and whispered, Lord, I surrender it all to you. Even if I don't know what's next, I trust you. In that moment, a deep peace washed over me, not the absence of problems, but the assurance that I was not walking alone. The process of reclaiming my money continued, sometimes slow and frustrating, but steadily moving forward. Each recovered penny was a reminder of God's faithfulness. More importantly, the experience reshaped my understanding of what true wealth means. It's not measured in dollars or possessions, but in peace of heart, faithfulness, and the ability to rise after every fall. I often recalled a prayer that helped me through the darkest times: God, let me see the depth of your unchanging love. It was a reminder that even when life shifts around me, God's love remains constant, a foundation I can build upon. Looking back now, I see that losing everything was a crucible that refined my spirit. It taught me patience in waiting, courage in adversity, and grace in forgiveness. I am grateful not only for the restoration I experienced but also for the transformation of my heart. This journey taught me that faith is not just a belief, but an active choice, to trust, to hope, to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. And I want to leave you with this: no matter what losses or trials you face, you can find strength in God's unchanging love. It's a love that meets us in our darkest moments and guides us back to the light. If you are walking through your own storm today, I encourage you to start your day thanking God, to hold on to faith, and to believe that restoration is possible, not only of what's lost but of your very spirit. Because with God, no loss is final, no pain is wasted, and every tear can be turned into testimony. Looking back on everything, I see now that the pain I went through was not the end of my story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter shaped not by what I lost, but by what I gained in faith, strength, and understanding. There were moments when I thought I would never recover, when the weight of betrayal and loss seemed unbearable. But through those moments, I learned to lean not on my own strength, but on God's unchanging love. That love became the foundation beneath my feet, steady and sure, even when everything around me felt like it was crumbling. I want to share with you something simple, yet powerful, that carried me through those darkest times, the practice of starting each day with gratitude. Saying a prayer like, "Thank you, God, for your faithfulness," or "Help me see your grace today," can shift our hearts and minds in ways we don't always expect. It's easy to focus on what's broken or lost, but when we choose to thank God first, we open ourselves to His healing and restoration. My journey was long and not always easy. There were tears, doubts, and fears. But each step was a step closer to healing. And healing isn't just about getting back what was taken from us. It's about rediscovering who we are in God's eyes, loved, valued, and worthy of hope. I found that faith is not a magic wand that erases pain, but a lifeline that keeps us moving forward. It's the courage to stand up after falling, the hope that light will come after darkness. If you are struggling with loss, betrayal, or hardship today, know that you are not alone. God sees you. He hears your cries. And His love for you never fails. You may not understand why you are going through your storm right now, but trust that God is working in ways beyond what you can see. Hold on to your faith. Let your prayers be honest, raw, and full of hope. And remember, restoration comes not just in what is returned, but in the new strength you gain along the way. I want to leave you with one final thought: every tear you shed is precious to God. Every moment of doubt is met with His patience. And every act of faith, no matter how small, is a step toward reclaiming your life. Thank you for listening to my story. I pray it encourages you to keep trusting, keep hoping, and keep believing in God's unchanging love. Because no matter what you've lost, with God, you can reclaim everything, and so much more.